The single candle flame bent and swayed as Clara Owens drew the shuttle through the warped threads for what felt like the 1,000th time that evening, her fingers aching, her eyes burning with exhaustion as she worked alone in the cramped back room of the textile shop in Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, where she had spent nearly every waking hour since her father died 3 months ago and left her with nothing but debts and the dying weaving trade he had clung to so desperately. It was late April in 1883, and the desert air that crept through the gaps in the wooden walls still carried the coolness of night, despite the suffocating heat that would arrive with dawn. Clara had been working since before sunrise, her fingers moving mechanically across the loom, creating the sturdy cotton fabric that the general store had ordered weeks ago. The payment would barely cover the rent on this small shop, but it was all she had. At 22 years old, she had become invisible in this rough frontier town, known only as the quiet woman who wove fabric by candlelight while the rest of Fort McDowell lived in the sun. Her mother had died when Clara was just a child, leaving her father to raise her amid the looms and spinning wheels. He had taught her the trade with gentle patience, never quite understanding that the world was changing, that ready-made fabrics from the East were flooding the markets, making handweavers obsolete. But Clara had loved him fiercely, and so she had learned every technique, every pattern, pouring her heart into work that fewer and fewer people wanted. Now he was gone, buried in the small cemetery on the hill, and Clara was alone. She had no other family, no friends to speak of. The women of the town looked at her with pity or disdain, seeing only the pale, thin girl who dressed in plain homespun and kept her dark hair pulled back severely, who never attended the church socials or Saturday dances. They did not see that she had no time for such things, that every moment spent away from the loom meant another day she could not pay what she owed. The candle sputtered, and Clara realized with a sinking heart that it was nearly burned through. She had only 2 more left and no money to buy more until she delivered this fabric. Her eyes felt full of sand, and her shoulders ached from hunching over her work. The pattern before her blurred and she blinked hard, forcing herself to focus. She could not afford mistakes. Every thread mattered. Outside, she heard the distant sound of laughter from the saloon 3 blocks away. Life happened out there in the daylight, in the noise and chaos of this growing town. But that world was not for her. Her world was this small room, the click and thump of the loom, the endless threads that ran through her fingers like the hours of her life, going nowhere. The candle flickered again, and Clara paused, pressing her palms against her tired eyes. She allowed herself one moment of despair, one moment to feel the crushing weight of her loneliness and fear. Then she took a breath and reached for the shuttle again. That was when she heard the knock at the front door of the shop. Clara froze, her heart suddenly pounding. It was well past midnight. No one came to the textile shop at this hour. Her mind immediately went to the darker possibilities. Fort McDowell had grown rapidly with the expansion of the railroad and the nearby military presence, and with that growth had come rougher elements. She was a woman alone, and everyone knew it. The knock came again, more insistent this time. A deep male voice called out, "Hello, is anyone here? I saw your light." Clara stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting so long. She moved quietly to the front room, where bolts of fabric stood on shelves and her father's old counter still held his measuring tools and ledger. Through the dusty window, she could make out the shape of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. "We are closed," she called out, her voice shakier than she wanted it to be. "I know it is late, miss, and I apologize," the man said. His voice was deep but not threatening, colored with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or perhaps further south. "But I have ridden all day and I need help. My sister is getting married in 2 weeks, and the dress she ordered from Phoenix never arrived. I was told there was a weaver here who might be able to help." Clara hesitated. The mention of payment, even unspoken, tugged at her. But it was the middle of the night, and she did not know this man. "Come back in the morning," she said. There was a pause. Then the man said, "Please, miss, I can pay well. I know it is an imposition, but Sarah, my sister, she has had so little happiness in her life. Our mother died 2 years ago, and Sarah has been caring for our younger siblings while I work the ranch. This wedding, it means everything to her. I promised her I would find someone who could make her a proper dress." Despite herself, Clara felt something shift in her chest. The earnestness in his voice touched something she thought had gone numb. Slowly, she moved to the door and slid back the bolt. The man who stood on the wooden walkway was younger than his voice had suggested, perhaps 26 or 27. Even in the faint moonlight, Clara could see that he was handsome in the way of men who worked outdoors, with sun-weathered skin and strong features. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she could feel his gaze on her, taking in her appearance with what seemed like surprise. "Thank you," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair. "My name is Daniel Everett. My family has a ranch about 15 miles northeast of here." "Clara Owens," she replied, keeping her hand on the door, ready to close it if needed. "You said your sister needs a wedding dress." "Yes, miss. She is marrying a good man, a soldier from the fort. They want to marry on May 12th. I know that does not give much time, but I would pay whatever you ask. I have money." Clara's practical mind was already calculating. 2 weeks was not much time for a proper wedding dress, especially while she still had other orders to fulfill. But the payment could change everything for her. It could give her breathing room, time to find more work, perhaps even hire help. "Come inside," she said, stepping back. Daniel Everett entered the shop, and Clara noticed how he moved carefully, as though aware that his size and presence might be intimidating in the small space. He was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that came from hard work. He held his hat in his hands, his fingers running along the brim in what seemed like a nervous gesture. "What kind of dress did she want?" Clara asked, moving behind the counter to put some distance between them. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She drew this. Sarah has always been good at drawing. She saw a dress in a magazine once and never forgot it." Clara took the paper and unfolded it, moving closer to the lamp she kept on the counter. The drawing was indeed skillfully done, showing a dress with a fitted bodice, long sleeves with delicate buttons, and a full skirt. It was elegant but not overly elaborate, the kind of dress a practical woman would choose. "This would require fine fabric," Clara said. "I have some ivory silk that came in last year before my father became ill. It has never been used, and lace for the collar and cuffs." "Whatever you need," Daniel said. "I want her to have something beautiful. She deserves that." Clara looked up at him, really meeting his eyes for the first time. They were a warm brown, sincere and kind. She saw in his face the same exhaustion she felt in her own bones, the weariness of someone who carried too much responsibility. But she also saw determination and a deep love for his sister. "I can do it," she heard herself saying. "But I will need to take your sister's measurements, and I will have to work day and night to finish in time. It will cost $75. It was more than she would normally dare to ask, but the work was significant, and she needed to know if he was serious. Daniel did not even blink. "That is more than fair. I can bring Sarah tomorrow to be measured. What time would suit you?" "In the afternoon, around 2 o'clock. I need to finish another order in the morning. We will be here." Daniel pulled out a leather wallet and counted out bills, placing them on the counter. Here is half now, you will get the rest when the dress is finished. Clara stared at the money. It was more cash than she had seen in months. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, miss, thank you." Daniel put his hat back on, then paused. "You should not be working alone so late at night. It is not safe." "I have no choice," Clara said, lifting her chin. "This is my livelihood." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "I see. Well, we will not keep you any longer tonight, until tomorrow, Miss Owens." He left, and Clara locked the door behind him, her mind whirling. She returned to the back room and her loom, but she could not focus on her work. The money sat on the counter like a promise, and the image of Daniel Everett's kind eyes stayed with her in a way she could not explain. When Daniel and Sarah arrived the next afternoon, Clara had cleaned the shop as best she could, and had the silk fabric laid out for them to see. Sarah Everett was a pleasant-looking young woman of about 19, with her brother's dark hair and a smile that lit up her whole face. She gasped when she saw the silk. "Oh, it is beautiful. Daniel, look at how it catches the light." Clara found herself smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "Let me take your measurements and then we can discuss any specific details you want." As she worked, measuring Sarah's waist, bust, and shoulders, the siblings talked easily with each other. Clara learned that they had 3 younger siblings, 2 brothers aged 15 and 12, and a sister who was 8. After their mother died, Sarah had become the heart of the household while Daniel worked to keep the ranch profitable. "Thomas, my fiancé, he is wonderful with the children," Sarah said. "He comes to dinner twice a week and he always brings treats. They adore him already." "You are lucky," Clara said softly, writing down the measurements. "I am. I never thought I would marry, honestly. I assumed I would always be needed at home. But Thomas said the children could visit us at the fort as much as they like, and Daniel has agreed to hire a housekeeper to help." Clara glanced at Daniel, who stood by the window, looking out at the street. There was something in his posture, a loneliness perhaps, that resonated with her own. "You must miss your mother," Clara said to Sarah. The girl's eyes grew sad. "Every day. But Daniel has tried so hard to make sure we are all right. He works himself to exhaustion. I worry about him." "Sarah, I am fine," Daniel said without turning around. "You are not fine. You barely sleep, you never take time for yourself, and you certainly never think about your own happiness." Sarah looked at Clara conspiratorially. "He needs someone to look after him as much as anyone." "Sarah," Daniel said, a warning note in his voice now. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She focused on her work, finishing the measurements quickly. "I will have this ready by May 11th, the day before the wedding. You can come for a fitting in 1 week to make sure everything is proceeding correctly." "Thank you so much, Miss Owens," Sarah said, taking Clara's hands impulsively. "You have no idea what this means to me." After they left, Clara threw herself into the work. She finished the general store's order that night and delivered it the next morning, using part of that payment to buy more candles and thread. Then she began on the wedding dress. Working on something so beautiful was different from the utilitarian fabrics she usually produced. As she cut the silk and began to sew, she found herself thinking about love and marriage, things she had long ago accepted would never be part of her life. She was too poor, too plain, too buried in work to attract any man's attention. But as she stitched, she kept thinking about Daniel Everett, the way he had spoken about his sister with such love, the concern in his eyes when he had told her it was not safe to work alone at night, the respect he had shown her, treating her as a skilled craftswoman rather than just a desperate woman. Clara shook her head, trying to clear such foolish thoughts. A man like that, a rancher with property and a family, would never look twice at someone like her. She needed to focus on her work and nothing else. The week passed in a blur of sewing. Clara worked until her fingers bled, stitching the delicate lace onto the collar and cuffs, fitting the bodice, creating the full skirt that would make Sarah feel like a princess. She worked by candlelight again. The daylight hours never quite enough for all she needed to do. On the day of the fitting, Sarah arrived with Daniel and their 8-year-old sister, Emily. The little girl was a bundle of energy, fascinated by all the fabric and thread in the shop. When Sarah tried on the partially completed dress, she actually cried. "It is perfect," she breathed, looking at herself in Clara's small mirror. "It is more beautiful than I ever imagined." Clara felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the stuffy shop. This was why she loved weaving and sewing. The look on Sarah's face made all the exhaustion worthwhile. "Can you make me a dress like that someday?" Emily asked, her eyes wide. "When you are older and getting married, I am sure Miss Owens would be happy to," Sarah said. "That is many years away," Daniel said, ruffling his youngest sister's hair. "You are not growing up that fast if I have anything to say about it." Emily giggled and ran to her brother, hugging his waist. The sight of this big, strong man being so gentle with the child made Clara's heart ache with a longing she had not known she still possessed. After Sarah changed back into her regular dress, and they were preparing to leave, Daniel lingered by the door. "You look tired, Miss Owens," he said quietly. "I am fine." "When did you last have a proper meal, or sleep more than a few hours?" Clara bristled. "I do not see how that is your concern. You are right, it is not my business." But he did not look away. "Sarah is having a small celebration at the ranch this Sunday, just family and a few friends. She wanted me to invite you, as a thank you for your work." "That is not necessary." "Perhaps not necessary, but we would like you to come, please. It would make Sarah happy, and heaven knows, you could use a few hours away from this shop." Clara wanted to refuse, but the thought of a meal she did not have to cook herself, of seeing the ranch and the family together, of spending a little more time in Daniel's presence, was too tempting. "All right," she said. "What time?" "I will come fetch you at noon. We are a bit remote and the roads can be tricky if you do not know them." That Sunday, Clara put on her best dress, which was not saying much. It was a simple brown cotton dress, clean but worn, with a white collar she had sewn herself. She brushed out her long dark hair and tried to pin it up in a more flattering style than her usual severe bun, but her hands were not accustomed to such things, and she finally gave up. When Daniel arrived with a small wagon, she felt embarrassed by her plain appearance. But he smiled when he saw her, a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You look lovely, Miss Owens. You do not have to say that. I would not say it if I did not mean it." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, and Clara was acutely aware of the strength in his hands, the warmth of his touch even through her gloves. As they started down the road out of town, she tried to think of something to say, but her mind was blank. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Owens," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "How did you come to be a weaver?" "My father was a weaver. He taught me everything. It is all I have ever known." "It must have been difficult when he passed. Sarah told me about it. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." "And I am sorry about your mother." They shared a look of understanding, two people who knew the weight of grief and responsibility. "You have other family?" Daniel asked. "No, it is just me now." "That must be lonely." Clara swallowed hard. "I stay busy." "There is not much time for loneliness when you are working." "That is what I tell myself too," Daniel said quietly. "But it is not really true, is it?" She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "No, it is not." The ranch, when they arrived, was more impressive than Clara had expected. A sturdy two-story house stood amid a cluster of outbuildings, with corrals holding horses and cattle visible in the distance. The land stretched out in all directions, brown and scrubby but vast and open in a way that made Clara's breath catch. Sarah came running out to greet them, followed by Emily and the two brothers, whose names Clara learned were David and Marcus. They were a boisterous, affectionate bunch, so different from the quiet solitude of Clara's life. Inside, the house was warm and lived in, with mismatched furniture and children's drawings pinned to the walls. A woman in her 50s was in the kitchen, and Sarah introduced her as Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper Daniel had recently hired. "So you are the miracle worker who is making Sarah's dress," Mrs. Chen said, shaking Clara's hand firmly. "She talks about nothing else." The meal was simple but delicious. Roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden. Clara sat between Emily and Sarah, and across from Daniel, who kept watching her with an expression she could not quite read. After the meal, the younger children ran outside to play, and Sarah excused herself to help Mrs. Chen with the dishes, despite the older woman's protests. This left Clara and Daniel alone in the sitting room. "Would you like to see the ranch?" Daniel asked. They walked outside into the bright afternoon sun, and Clara had to shield her eyes at first, so accustomed was she to the dimness of her shop. Daniel showed her the horses, including a gentle mare named Daisy that he said Sarah loved to ride. "It is beautiful here," Clara said, looking out at the expanse of land. "So much space, so much sky. Do you ride? I never learned. Would you like to?" Before Clara could answer, Daniel was leading Daisy out of the corral and helping Clara up onto the horse's back. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins, and Clara felt her heart begin to race. They walked slowly around the property, Daniel pointing out various landmarks and telling her about the ranch. But Clara barely heard the words. She was intensely aware of his nearness, the solid warmth of him at her back, the gentle way he spoke to the horse. "You spend all your time in that dark shop," Daniel said softly. "You should see the sun more often. You should see the sky. I have work to do. Everyone needs rest, Clara. May I call you Clara?" "Yes." Her name sounded different in his voice, precious somehow. "Clara, you are working yourself to death. I can see it in your eyes and how thin you are. What are you running from?" "I am not running from anything. I am trying to survive." "Is that all you want? Just survival?" She turned her head to look at him and found his face very close to hers. His eyes were searching, kind, but also sad. "What else is there?" she whispered. "Life, joy, connection, love. Those things are not for people like me." "Why not?" "Because I am nobody. I have nothing. I am just a weaver working by candlelight trying to make enough to eat." "You are not nobody," Daniel said fiercely. "You are skilled and talented. You are strong, stronger than you know, and you are beautiful even if you cannot see it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You do not know me. Then let me know you. Come to dinner again next Sunday. And the Sunday after that. Let me show you that there is more to life than that dark shop." "Why?" Clara demanded. "Why do you care?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Because when I saw you that first night, working alone by candlelight, looking so tired and so determined, something in me recognized something in you. We are the same, you and I. We have both been so busy taking care of others, of responsibilities, that we have forgotten to take care of ourselves. We have forgotten what it is like to want something just for us." "And what do you want?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "I want to bring you into the daylight," Daniel said. "I want to see you smile. I want to know what makes you happy, what you dream about, what you would do if you were not afraid." Clara's hands were shaking. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her the way Daniel was looking at her now. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I," Daniel said, and he smiled. "But we could figure it out together." They rode back to the house in silence, But it was a different kind of silence now, charged with possibility. When Daniel helped Clara down from the horse, his hands lingered on her waist, and she did not pull away. That night, as Clara worked on Sarah's dress, she kept thinking about what Daniel had said, about the daylight, about life and joy and love, things she had thought were not meant for her. She finished the dress 2 days before the wedding, working through one final night to complete the last details. When she held it up in the morning light, she felt a fierce pride. It was beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful thing she had ever made. Sarah came for the final fitting with all the siblings in tow, and when she saw the finished dress, she burst into happy tears and hugged Clara so tightly that Clara could hardly breathe. "It is perfect. Oh, Clara, it is absolutely perfect." "You will be the most beautiful bride in the territory," Clara said, and meant it. Daniel paid her the remaining money and then added an extra $20. "You have given my sister something precious," he said. "This is just a small token of my gratitude." The wedding was lovely. Clara attended, sitting in the back of the small church, watching as Sarah walked down the aisle in her beautiful dress to marry her soldier. The joy on the girl's face made Clara's work feel worthwhile in a way that money never could. After the ceremony at the reception held at the fort, Daniel found Clara standing alone watching the dancing. "Dance with me," he said. "I do not know how." "I will teach you." He led her onto the floor, and Clara stumbled through the steps, mortified by her clumsiness. But Daniel just laughed, a warm, genuine sound, and held her steady. "You are doing fine," he said. "Just follow my lead." As they turned around the floor, Clara gradually began to relax. She forgot about the other people watching. She forgot about her shop and her debts and her exhaustion. There was only this moment, only Daniel's hand in hers, only the warmth in his eyes. "Come to the ranch next Sunday," he said. "Please." "All right." That Sunday visit became a pattern. Every week, Daniel would come to town and bring Clara to the ranch. At first, she told herself she was just being polite, just accepting the family's gratitude for the wedding dress. But as the weeks passed and spring turned to early summer, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Daniel Everett. It terrified her. Love was a luxury she could not afford. Love meant vulnerability, meant depending on someone else, meant risking the careful control she had built around her life. But Daniel was patient and persistent. He showed up every Sunday without fail. He brought her small gifts, fresh eggs from the ranch, wildflowers he had picked, a book he thought she might enjoy. He also started coming to town during the week, appearing at her shop in the late afternoon with food. "You need to eat properly," he would say, unpacking bread and cheese and fruit. "You cannot live on nothing." They would sit together in the shop, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the struggles of managing everything while trying to be there for his siblings. Clara found herself opening up about her father, about her fears for the future, about the slow death of the weaving trade. "You could do other kinds of sewing," Daniel suggested one evening. "You are so talented, Clara. You could make dresses for women in town, not just weave utilitarian fabric." "I would need a real shop for that. Better tools, more fabric, money I do not have." "What if you would help?" Clara looked at him sharply. "I will not take charity. It would not be charity, it would be an investment. I believe in you, Clara. I believe you could build something wonderful if you had the chance." "Why?" she asked, not for the first time. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Daniel set down the piece of bread he had been eating and looked at her directly. "Because I am in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "You cannot be." "Why not?" "Because I am nobody. Because I have nothing to offer." "Because you could have any woman you wanted, and I am just a poor weaver who Daniel stood and crossed to her, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. You are not nobody, and I will keep saying that until you believe it. You are brave and strong and talented and beautiful. You work harder than anyone I have ever known. You have survived things that would have broken other people, and when I am with you, I feel like I can finally breathe, like I am not alone anymore. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be what you need. You already are, Daniel said gently. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. Just be yourself. That is all I want. That is all I have ever wanted. I love you too, Clara whispered. I think I have loved you since that first night when you came to my door. Daniel smiled and then he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. Clara felt something inside her that had been locked away for years finally break open, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had kept hidden. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel said, "Marry me, Clara. Come live at the ranch with me. Let me take care of you for a change. Let me bring you into the daylight. The children adore you already. Emily asks about you constantly, and Sarah tells me at least once a week that I had better not let you get away." Clara laughed, a sound she rarely made. "What about my work? We will set up a proper workshop for you at the ranch. You can make dresses for women all over the territory. We will hire someone to help you. You can build the business you have always deserved to have, but you will not have to do it alone anymore. You have thought about this." "I have thought about nothing else for weeks." Clara looked at this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly, who had seen past her poverty and exhaustion to something worth loving. She thought about the dark shop where she had spent so many lonely hours, working by candlelight, convinced that was all her life would ever be. And then she thought about the ranch, the wide open sky, the warmth of family, the possibility of building something new. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Daniel let out a whoop of joy that made her laugh again. He picked her up and spun her around the small shop, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, longer this time, and Clara felt the last of her walls crumble away. They were married a month later, in the same church where Sarah had married her soldier. Clara wore a dress she made herself, a beautiful ivory creation with delicate embroidery. Sarah stood up as her bridesmaid, and all the Everett siblings were there, beaming with happiness. Mrs. Chen had helped Clara close up the shop and move her few belongings to the ranch. Daniel had converted one of the outbuildings into a bright, spacious workroom with windows that let in floods of natural light. He had bought her a new loom, better tools, bolts of fine fabric in every color. "I want you to create in the daylight," he had said when he showed it to her. "No more candlelight unless it is by choice." On their wedding night in the room they would share in the ranch house, Daniel held Clara close and said, "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," she admitted. "This is all so different from everything I have known. What if I am not good at being a wife? What if I fail?" "You will not fail. And even if you stumble sometimes, we will figure it out together. That is what marriage is, Clara. Two people choosing to face life together instead of alone." "I do love you so much," Clara said, looking up at him. "I never knew I could feel like this." "Neither did I," Daniel said and kissed her. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Clara had lived alone for so long that sharing space with Daniel and helping to care for his siblings felt overwhelming at times. But the children made it easier. Emily appointed herself Clara's special helper, following her around and chattering constantly. The boys, David and Marcus, were more reserved at first, but they warmed up when Clara started teaching them to play card games in the evenings and never scolded them for being too loud or rambunctious. Sarah, now Sarah Cooper and living at the fort with her husband, came to visit often. She and Clara became genuine friends, and Sarah helped Clara learn how to manage a household, how to cook the foods the family loved, how to navigate the social expectations of being a rancher's wife. But the greatest joy was the work. In her bright new workshop, with windows that let in the desert sun, Clara began to create. Word spread quickly about her skill, and women started coming from Fort McDowell and even from Phoenix to commission dresses and fine linens. Daniel hired a young woman named Maria to help with the sewing, and together they built a thriving business. Clara still sometimes woke in the night, panicked that she would find herself back in the dark shop, alone and afraid. But then she would feel Daniel's arm around her, hear his steady breathing, and she would remember that this was real. She was loved. She was safe. She had found her place in the daylight. One evening in late autumn, about 6 months after their wedding, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The children were inside with Mrs. Chen, and the ranch was peaceful. "I have something to tell you," Clara said, taking Daniel's hand. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby." Daniel turned to her, his eyes wide with wonder. "Truly, truly. The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could hardly breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I cannot believe it. We are going to have a child. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to describe it. He placed his hand gently on her stomach. "You have given me so much, Clara, more than I ever dreamed possible." "You are the one who gave me everything," Clara said. "You brought me out of the darkness. You showed me what life could be." "We saved each other," Daniel said, and kissed her softly. Their son was born in late spring of the following year, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's husband, who had become a dear friend to them both. Clara had been terrified of childbirth, but Daniel held her hand through all of it, and when the baby was finally placed in her arms, she wept with joy. The children were enchanted with their new nephew. Emily declared herself his special guardian, and could be found singing to him whenever he fussed. David and Marcus were more awkward but clearly proud to be uncles at their young ages. Clara's business continued to thrive. She had to hire 2 more assistants to keep up with the demand for her work. Women came from all over the territory, wanting dresses and linens made by the talented weaver who had married the Everett rancher. Clara took pride in every piece she created, but now her work was infused with joy rather than desperation. 2 years after Thomas was born, Clara had a daughter. They named her Catherine, after Clara's mother. She was a tiny, delicate thing who looked like a perfect miniature of Clara. Daniel doted on her shamelessly, this big, strong man reduced to babbling foolishness by his baby daughter. Sarah and Thomas had children of their own now, 2 daughters, and the families got together often. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter, so different from the silent, lonely shop where Clara had once spent her days. Sometimes, when Clara was working in her sun-filled workshop, she would pause and look out the window at the life she had built. She would see Daniel working with the horses, or the children playing in the yard, or the beautiful fabric she was creating in the daylight. And she would feel such overwhelming gratitude that she had to stop and catch her breath. She had been so convinced that she was meant to live in the shadows, working by candlelight until she worked herself to death. She had believed that love and happiness were for other people, not for her. But Daniel had refused to accept that. He had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. He had brought her into the daylight of his love, and in doing so, he had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined. One evening, when Thomas was 5 and Catherine was 3, and Clara was pregnant with their third child, the family gathered for dinner as they always did. It was a chaotic, joyful affair, with the children talking over each other and Daniel trying to maintain some semblance of order. Mrs. Chen had made a feast, and Emily, now 13 and already showing signs of becoming a beauty, was helping serve. After the meal, when the children were playing outside in the last light of day, Daniel pulled Clara aside. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "You have that far-away look." "I was just remembering," Clara said. "Remembering what my life was like before you, how dark and small it was, how certain I was that it would never change. Do you miss it? Not even for a second." Clara looked up at him, this man who had changed everything. "You kept your promise. You brought me into the daylight, and every day with you is brighter than I knew life could be." Daniel smiled and pulled her close. "You did the same for me, you know. I was just as lost as you were, just better at hiding it, but you brought light into my life too. You brought love and joy and purpose." "We found each other," Clara said. "We did, and I thank God for it every day." Their third child was another son whom they named William. He was a boisterous baby who rarely cried and seemed to smile at everything. The older children were experienced helpers now, and Clara marveled at how natural they were with the baby. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Daniel's hard work paid off, and they were able to expand their holdings and hire more help. This gave Daniel more time to spend with his family, which was what he wanted most. He taught Thomas and William to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and he was endlessly patient with Catherine, who was more interested in helping her mother in the workshop than in anything to do with ranching. Clara's business became one of the most successful in the territory. She had 6 women working for her now, and they produced everything from simple cotton dresses to elaborate silk gowns. Clara trained each of her employees personally, teaching them the techniques her father had taught her, making sure his legacy lived on. David and Marcus, the middle Everett boys, both went off to college back east, something Daniel made possible through years of careful saving. They came home for summers and holidays, full of stories about their studies and their adventures. Emily, who had always been the most outgoing of the siblings, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher. Daniel and Clara supported her completely, helping her attend a teaching college in Phoenix. Sarah and Thomas had 4 children in total, and their home at the fort was always open to the extended family. Holiday gatherings were enormous affairs, with dozens of people crowded into either the ranch house or Sarah's home, children running wild, adults catching up and sharing stories. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Clara with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had left Arizona, and they spent a week exploring the city, seeing the sights, eating in restaurants and staying in a real hotel. But as wonderful as it was, they were both relieved to come home to the ranch, to their children, to the life they had built together. "I do not need trips to fancy cities," Clara said as they unpacked. "Everything I could ever want is right here." "I feel the same," Daniel said. "Although it was nice to have you all to myself for a few days," Clara laughed. "We will have more time alone in a few years when the children are older. And then we will have grandchildren," Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. "This house will never be quiet, and I would not have it any other way." Thomas, their eldest, grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. When he was 19, he started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the bank manager. Daniel and Clara liked her immediately, and when Thomas announced his intention to marry, they gave their blessing gladly. Catherine, at 16, was already an accomplished seamstress and had started designing her own patterns. She had her mother's artistic eye and her father's head for business. Clara knew that one day, Catherine would take over the workshop, and she could not have been prouder. William, the baby of the family, was 12 now and already showing signs that he would be as tall as his father. He was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful, but he had a kind heart that reminded Clara of Daniel. On a warm summer evening, when Thomas was 20 and about to be married, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Sarah and Thomas Cooper were there with their children, all grown now themselves. Emily was there with her husband, a fellow teacher she had met in Phoenix. David and Marcus had both come home from their jobs back east, David now a lawyer and Marcus an engineer. As Clara looked around at all these people, this family that had grown so large and so full of love, she felt tears sting her eyes. "What is wrong?" Daniel asked quietly, appearing at her side. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I was just thinking about how different my life could have been. If you had not come to my shop that night, if you had not refused to let me hide in the darkness." "I thank God every day that I saw your light that night," Daniel said. "It led me to you, and you led me to all of this." "I love you," Clara said, looking up at him. His hair was graying now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I will love you," Daniel said, kissing her softly. "My beautiful weaver, the woman who brought light into my life." Around them, their family laughed and talked and celebrated. The ranch that had once been a place of loneliness for Daniel had become a haven of love and joy. And Clara, who had once believed she was meant to live alone in the shadows, had found herself at the center of a life more beautiful than any fabric she could weave. Years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and then great-grandchildren. Clara and Daniel grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They worked side by side, Daniel on the ranch and Clara in her workshop, until they were both too old to do much more than sit on the porch and watch the next generations carry on their legacy. The workshop Clara had built became famous throughout the Southwest. Catherine ran it now, with her own daughters learning the trade. The Everett Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the territory, managed by Thomas and his sons. William had surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, but he had returned to Fort McDowell to practice, wanting to be near his family. On a quiet evening in late autumn, when Clara was 72 and Daniel was 76, they sat together on the porch as they had so many times before. Their bodies were old and tired now, but their hands were still entwined, their love still as strong as ever. "You remember that first night?" Clara asked. "When you came to my shop?" "I remember everything about it," Daniel said. "I remember how the candlelight made your hair shine. I remember the exhaustion in your eyes. I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone who needed to be taken care of more, who deserved happiness more." "You gave me everything," Clara said softly. "A home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. You brought me into the daylight, just like you promised. And you gave me just as much," Daniel said. "You taught me that strength comes in many forms. You showed me what real courage looks like. And you loved me, even when I was just a rancher with too many responsibilities and not enough time." "I would do it all again," Clara said. "Every moment, every joy and every challenge, I would choose you every single time. As would I, my love, as would I." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the land they had worked and loved for so many decades. Inside the house, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, their laughter ringing through the rooms. The next generation was already growing, already preparing to carry on the legacy of love and hard work that Clara and Daniel had built. That night, Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Daniel's arms around her. He followed her 3 days later as though he could not bear to be parted from her, even in death. They were buried side by side in the family cemetery on the ranch, under the wide Arizona sky. Their children and grandchildren mourned them deeply, but they also celebrated the beautiful life the couple had shared. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about how his parents had shown him what true love looked like, how they had built something lasting and beautiful out of hardship and loneliness. Catherine talked about her mother's journey from a desperate weaver working by candlelight to a successful businesswoman and beloved matriarch. She spoke of her father's kindness and determination, how he had refused to let the woman he loved remain in the darkness. The workshop continued for generations, always bearing Clara's name. The ranch stayed in the Everett family, growing and thriving. And the story of the weaver and the cowboy who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the daylight became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. In Fort McDowell, people still spoke of Clara Owens and Daniel Everett decades after their deaths. They spoke of the love that had transformed two lonely people into the foundation of a dynasty. They spoke of the weaver who had worked by candlelight until a cowboy brought her into the daylight of his love, and how that love had created something that would last forever. The old textile shop where Clara had once worked was long gone, replaced by newer buildings as the town grew. But sometimes, people claimed they could still see a light in the window where it used to be, a candle burning in the darkness, waiting for someone to bring it into the light. And in the workshop that bore her name, where generations of women had learned to create beauty with their hands, there hung a portrait of Clara and Daniel on their wedding day. She was wearing the dress she had made herself, looking radiant and happy. He was standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, looking at her with such love and pride that it made everyone who saw it believe in the power of true love. Their story had ended, but the legacy of their love continued. In every dress made in Clara's workshop, in every child raised on the Everett Ranch, in every sunset watched from the porch where they had spent so many evenings together, Clara and Daniel lived on. They had found each other in the darkness and had created light that would shine for generations to come. And that light, born of love and courage and two people who had refused to remain alone, would never be extinguished.